Sarah Chen had always believed in saving lives, not taking them. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, she watched her grandmother tend to injured animals with gentle hands and infinite patience. When a bird fell from its nest, when a stray cat limped into their yard, when neighborhood kids scraped their knees on the playground, they all found their way to her grandmother's kitchen table, where band-aids and warm milk worked miracles. Healing is the highest calling, her grandmother would say, cleaning a wound with careful precision. Anyone can destroy. It takes real strength to mend what's broken. Those words echoed in Sarah's mind years later as she stood in the military recruitment office, her medical school acceptance letter folded in her back pocket. The recruiter, a stern woman with kind eyes, explained the benefits of the military medical program. Full tuition, guaranteed residency placement, and the chance to serve her country while learning from some of the best trauma surgeons in the world. You'll save more lives in 4 years of military service than most doctors save in a lifetime, the recruiter promised. Combat medics see everything. You'll come out of this program ready for anything. Sarah signed the papers that day, thinking she understood what anything meant. She was wrong. Basic training at Fort Sam Houston in Texas was everything she expected and nothing she prepared for. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly as drill sergeants screamed instructions that seemed designed to break spirits rather than build soldiers. Sarah's fellow recruits came from all walks of life. There was Marcus, a former gang member from Detroit who joined to escape the streets. Amy, a farm girl from Kansas who could fix any piece of equipment with duct tape and determination. David, a college graduate whose parents never forgave him for choosing the military over law school. Sean. You think this is summer camp? Drill Sergeant Rodriguez's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Sarah had stumbled during a particularly brutal obstacle course, her medical textbook falling from her pack and scattering pages across the muddy ground. In the field, that book won't save anyone if you can't keep up. She scrambled to collect the pages, mud seeping through her uniform. The other recruits helped without a word, understanding that they would all succeed together or fail apart. That night, as they cleaned their equipment in the barracks, Marcus helped her tape the damaged pages back together. "Why medicine?" he asked, his hands surprisingly gentle for someone covered in scars and tattoos. "My grandmother," Sarah replied simply. "She taught me that healing people is the most important thing you can do." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "My little sister got shot in a drive-by when she was 8. The medic who saved her life, man, he was like an angel. Kept her talking while they waited for the ambulance, told her jokes, made her laugh even though she was scared. She lives because of him. That's what I want to be for someone else's little sister." Those conversations happened often in basic training. Late at night, when the official mask of military discipline relaxed slightly, the recruits shared their stories. Amy joined because her family farm was drowning in medical debt after her father's accident. David wanted to prove he could do something meaningful with his life. Each person had a reason, a moment that led them to choose this path. The medical training was intense but fascinating. Sarah learned to stop arterial bleeding in under 30 seconds. She mastered airway management while blindfolded. She practiced battlefield medicine scenarios where every decision meant the difference between life and death. The instructors pushed them relentlessly, creating chaos and stress to simulate real combat conditions. In the field, you'll have wounded soldiers screaming, bullets flying, and explosions going off around you, Instructor Williams explained during a particularly grueling simulation. Your job is to stay calm and save lives. Nothing else matters. You are non-combatants. Your weapons are your medical supplies, your knowledge, and your determination to keep people alive. The non-combatant status was emphasized repeatedly. Medics were protected under the Geneva Convention. They wore distinctive red crosses on their uniforms and helmets. They were not to engage in combat except in direct self-defense. Their mission was purely humanitarian. Sarah took pride in that distinction. While other soldiers learned to operate heavy weapons and plan offensive strategies, she mastered the art of healing. She could perform emergency surgery with improvised tools, stabilize a wounded soldier for transport, and triage multiple casualties under pressure. Her hands, which had once helped her grandmother bandage injured animals, now learned to work miracles with human lives. The physical training was brutal but necessary. Medics had to be able to reach wounded soldiers anywhere on the battlefield. Sarah learned to low crawl through mud while carrying a full medical pack. She rappelled down cliffs, waded through rivers, and navigated obstacle courses that seemed designed by someone with a sadistic imagination. A wounded soldier doesn't care how tired you are, Drill Sergeant Rodriguez reminded them constantly. They need you to get to them fast and patch them up right. Everything else is secondary. Sarah's medical knowledge grew exponentially during those months. She learned anatomy not from textbooks but from realistic mannequins that bled fake blood and screamed through speakers. She practiced procedures under strobe lights and smoke machines, training her muscle memory to work despite sensory overload. The psychological preparation was equally important. Combat medics would see things that civilian doctors never encountered. Young soldiers with catastrophic injuries. Multiple casualties arriving simultaneously. The impossible choice of whom to treat first when resources were limited. Triage isn't personal, Dr. Martinez explained during one of their classroom sessions. You save who you can save. You make hard choices based on medical reality, not emotional attachment. A soldier who's going to die no matter what you do gets comfort care. A soldier who will live with minimal intervention gets basic treatment. You focus your energy on the ones you can actually save. Sarah struggled with this concept initially. Her instinct was to fight for every life, to never give up on anyone. The idea of deliberately providing less care to some patients felt like a betrayal of everything she believed about medicine. I understand your hesitation, Dr. Martinez said after class one day, noticing Sarah's troubled expression. It goes against every instinct we have as healers. But, in mass casualty situations, trying to save one unsavable patient might mean losing 3 others who could have lived. It's the hardest part of battlefield medicine. The weapons training was mandatory but minimal for medics. Sarah learned to clean and operate an M16 rifle, but the emphasis was always on her medical role. She qualified at the shooting range but spent far more time learning to use medical equipment under stress. You might need to defend yourself or your patients in extreme circumstances, the weapons instructor explained. But, remember, your primary mission is medical. Other soldiers fight so you can focus on healing. Sarah's performance in medical training was exceptional. She had steady hands, quick thinking, and an ability to stay calm under pressure that impressed even the veteran instructors. Her written examinations scored in the top percentile, and her practical skills were flawless. Chen has the instincts, Instructor Williams noted in her evaluation. She sees the whole picture, prioritizes correctly, and works efficiently under stress. Natural medic. As graduation approached, Sarah felt confident in her abilities but nervous about deployment. The training had been intense, but she knew real combat would be entirely different. No amount of simulation could prepare someone for the reality of treating wounded friends while under enemy fire. The night before graduation, the surviving members of her training class gathered in the barracks for a final conversation. Of the 42 recruits who had started the program, 38 were graduating. 2 had been medically discharged due to injuries, and 2 had been dismissed for failing to meet standards. We're going to different units, probably different countries, Amy said, polishing her medical insignia for the ceremony. But, we're all going to remember what we learned here. Marcus nodded, checking his equipment one final time. Doc Martinez pulled me aside today. Told me I had the makings of a great medic, but I needed to remember that saving lives sometimes means making hard choices. Not sure I understand what he meant yet. David was unusually quiet, staring at a letter from his parents. They had finally written to him after months of silence, expressing pride in his choice and fear for his safety. My mom asked me to promise I'd come home, he said finally. How do you promise something like that? Sarah looked around at these people who had become like family over the past months. They had supported each other through the hardest training any of them had ever experienced. They had learned to trust each other completely, to depend on each other in ways that civilian friendships never required. We all come home, she said firmly. We watch each other's backs, we do our jobs, and we all come home. The graduation ceremony was both celebration and solemn ceremony. Family members filled the auditorium, many seeing their loved ones in uniform for the first time. Sarah's parents had driven from Ohio, her grandmother too frail to make the trip but sending a letter that Sarah treasured. 38 new combat medics, the commanding officer announced to the assembled crowd. Each of these soldiers has trained for months to master skills that will save lives on the battlefield. They are non-combatants, protected by international law, dedicated to healing rather than harm. They represent the best of military medicine and humanitarian service. Sarah stood at attention in her dress uniform, the medical insignia gleaming on her collar. The red cross on her helmet would mark her as a healer, a protector of life in the midst of violence. She thought of her grandmother's words about healing being the highest calling and felt proud of her choice. After the ceremony, as families mingled with newly graduated soldiers, Sarah's father pulled her aside. A quiet man who rarely expressed emotion openly, he struggled to find words for the moment. I'm proud of you, he said finally. Your grandmother would be too. You're going to save lives over there. That's the plan, Sarah replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Her mother hugged her tightly, tears threatening despite her efforts to stay strong. Promise me you'll be careful. Remember that you're someone's daughter, someone's granddaughter. You matter too. Sarah promised, knowing it was both necessary and impossible. Careful was a relative term in a combat zone, and mattering was secondary to the mission. But she understood her mother's need to hear those words. The next morning brought assignments and departure schedules. Sarah was assigned to the 2nd Infantry Division, heading to Afghanistan as part of a combat support unit. Her job would be providing medical care to a forward operating base and responding to casualties in the field. Marcus received orders for Iraq, working with a convoy protection unit. Amy was assigned to a field hospital in Germany, providing care for wounded soldiers evacuated from combat zones. David would serve with a Special Operations Support Unit, details classified but clearly dangerous. They exchanged contact information and promises to stay in touch, knowing that military communications would make that difficult. Sarah packed her equipment carefully, checking and rechecking her medical supplies. Everything had its place, and she could locate any piece of equipment by touch in complete darkness. The flight to Afghanistan was long and uncomfortable, filled with soldiers heading to various assignments. Sarah used the time to review her medical procedures one more time, visualizing scenarios and practicing mental triage decisions. The closer they got to their destination, the more real the deployment became. Landing at Bugram Air Base was like stepping into another world. The heat was oppressive, the dust omnipresent, and the sound of helicopters constant. Sarah joined a group of replacement personnel being transported to various forward operating bases throughout the country. The convoy ride to her assignment was Sarah's first real taste of combat zone reality. Armored vehicles, constant radio chatter about potential threats, and the knowledge that every mile of road could hide an explosive device. The soldiers around her were relaxed but alert, a combination that spoke to months or years of experience in this environment. First deployment, asked Sergeant First Class Thompson, a weathered medic with multiple deployment patches on his uniform. Yes, Sergeant, Sarah replied, trying to hide her nervousness. You'll do fine, he said with surprising kindness. The training's good, but nothing really prepares you for the real thing. Just remember your training, trust your instincts, and don't try to be a hero. Heroes get people killed. Professionals save lives. Forward operating base courage was smaller than Sarah had expected, surrounded by concrete barriers and razor wire. The medical facility was a converted shipping container with air conditioning, electricity, and enough equipment to handle serious trauma cases. It wasn't fancy, but it was functional. Dr. Peterson, the senior medical officer, briefed Sarah on her duties and the base situation. "We serve about 200 personnel here, plus support convoy operations and occasional patrols. Most of what you'll see is routine medical care, but when casualties come in, it gets intense fast." Sarah settled into the rhythm of military life quickly. Morning formation, equipment checks, routine medical care for everything from headaches to minor injuries. The work was familiar, even if the setting was strange. She treated soldiers for dehydration, stomach bugs, and the occasional accident. The other medical personnel were experienced and welcoming. Corporal Johnson, a medic on his third deployment, showed her the shortcuts and unofficial procedures that made life easier. Specialist Martinez, a tough woman from Texas, taught her how to handle difficult patients and improvise when supplies ran short. "The key is staying calm," Martinez explained during a quiet afternoon in the medical facility. "Soldiers can sense when medical personnel are panicked or uncertain. If you're calm and confident, they trust you. Trust is everything out here." Sarah appreciated the guidance but felt ready for more challenging work. The routine medical care was important, but she had trained for trauma medicine, for saving lives under fire. She found herself hoping for the chance to prove herself in a real emergency. She was careful not to voice that hope aloud. The veteran medics understood that wishing for casualties was natural but dangerous thinking. Emergency medicine was about being ready when needed, not seeking out opportunities to prove oneself. 3 weeks into her deployment, Sarah got her first real test. A convoy returning from a supply run radioed that one of their vehicles had hit an improvised explosive device. 3 wounded, 1 serious, estimated arrival time 15 minutes. The medical facility transformed instantly. Dr. Peterson began preparing for surgery while Sarah and the other medics set up triage areas and organized equipment. The casual atmosphere vanished, replaced by focused professionalism. "Chen, you're primary on the serious case when they arrive," Dr. Peterson announced. "Johnson and Martinez will handle the other 2. Remember your training and don't overthink it." Sarah felt her heart rate increase but her mind clear. This was what she had trained for, what she had dreamed of since her grandmother first showed her how to heal. The convoy vehicles approached the base in a cloud of dust, their engines straining under the weight of urgency. The moment the first wounded soldier was carried through the medical facility door, Sarah's training took over completely. The chaos of voices, the smell of blood and burned metal, the desperate urgency of life-threatening injuries, it all faded into background as she focused entirely on the person in front of her. The soldier was young, maybe 19, with shrapnel wounds to his chest and abdomen. His vital signs were weak but stable, his breathing labored but adequate. Sarah's hands moved automatically, checking for internal bleeding, establishing for access, administering pain medication. "What's your name?" she asked, keeping her voice calm and reassuring. "Private Williams," he gasped. "Am I going to die?" "Not today," Sarah replied firmly, meaning every word. "I'm going to take good care of you, and you're going to be fine." For the next hour, Sarah worked with a focus and intensity she had never experienced. Every procedure from her training, every piece of knowledge from her textbooks, every instinct developed through months of simulation came together in service of keeping Private Williams alive. When the helicopter arrived to evacuate him to a larger medical facility, Williams was stable and conscious. He grabbed Sarah's hand as they loaded him onto the aircraft. "Thank you," he said simply. Sarah watched the helicopter disappear into the distance, carrying her first real save to safety. The adrenaline began to wear off, replaced by a deep satisfaction unlike anything she had ever felt. This was why she had become a medic. This moment, this life saved, justified every difficult day of training. "Good work, Chen," Dr. Peterson said, cleaning up the medical facility. That was textbook trauma care under pressure. Williams is alive because you did everything right. The other wounded soldiers had also been successfully treated and evacuated. The convoy crew suffered minor injuries but would return to duty within days. The attack had been serious, but the medical response had been perfect. That night, Sarah called her parents using the base's satellite phone system. She couldn't discuss operational details, but she could share the satisfaction of knowing she had made a difference. "I saved someone today," she told her mother. "Really saved them. A young soldier who might have died if I hadn't been here." Her mother's pride was evident even through the static-filled connection. "Your grandmother would be so proud. You're doing exactly what she taught you to do." As Sarah settled into her bunk that night, she reflected on the day's events. The training had prepared her well, but the reality of battlefield medicine was both more intense and more rewarding than she had imagined. She felt confident in her abilities and ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She had no way of knowing that those challenges would soon test not just her medical skills, but the very foundations of everything she believed about her role as a healer. The ambush was still weeks away, and Sarah Chen still believed that medics don't fight. The routine at Forward Operating Base Courage continued for several more weeks. Sarah treated soldiers for various ailments, participated in medical training exercises, and gradually became an integral part of the base's medical team. She wrote letters home describing the landscape, the heat, and the camaraderie among the medical staff, always careful to avoid any operational details that might worry her family or compromise security. Her confidence grew with each successful treatment, each patient stabilized and evacuated safely. The other medical personnel began relying on her judgment and skills, and Dr. Peterson occasionally asked for her input on difficult cases. Sarah felt she was finally living up to her potential as a healer. The first hint that her world was about to change came during a routine briefing about increased enemy activity in the region. Intelligence reports suggested that insurgent groups were becoming more aggressive, targeting military patrols and supply convoys with greater frequency. "Medical personnel need to be especially aware," the intelligence officer warned. "Recent reports indicate that some groups are deliberately targeting medics and medical facilities. The Red Cross that protects you under international law means nothing to these people." Sarah listened to the briefing with growing concern, but still believed that her medical training and non-combatant status would keep her safe. Medics were healers, protected by centuries of military tradition and international law. The idea that someone would deliberately target medical personnel seemed incomprehensible to her. As the weeks passed and the reports of attacks grew more frequent, Sarah began to understand that her deployment would be different from what she had expected. The enemy they faced didn't follow the rules of warfare she had learned about in training. For them, a medic treating wounded soldiers was just another target. The realization slowly dawned on her that everything she believed about her role as a non-combatant healer might not be enough to protect her or her patients in this environment. The Red Cross on her helmet, which she had worn with such pride, might actually make her more vulnerable rather than less. Sarah pushed these thoughts aside, focusing on her medical duties and the soldiers who depended on her care. She continued to believe that healing was her highest calling and that her dedication to saving lives would somehow protect her from the moral complexities of combat. The ambush that would shatter her beliefs and force her to make an impossible choice was still approaching, though Sarah had no way of knowing it. For now, she remained a healer, confident in her mission and proud of her calling, unaware that soon she would face a decision that would challenge everything she thought she knew about medicine, morality, and survival in war. 2 months into her deployment, Sarah had settled into the demanding routine of forward base medical care. The initial excitement of her first save had mellowed into steady professional competence. She had treated dozens of soldiers for everything from heat exhaustion to minor combat injuries, and her reputation for calm efficiency had spread throughout the base. The morning of October 15th started like any other. Sarah woke before dawn to check her equipment and prepare for the day's medical sick call. The October air was cooler than the brutal heat of summer, making the early morning almost pleasant. She reviewed her medical supplies methodically, a habit that had become second nature. "Shen, you're going out with Convoy Alpha 7 today," Dr. Peterson announced during the morning briefing. "They're running medical supplies to combat Outpost Phoenix, and Lieutenant Morrison requested you specifically for the mission." Sarah felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Field missions were rare for base medical personnel, but Combat Outpost Phoenix had been experiencing increased casualties and needed experienced trauma care. The convoy would deliver medical supplies and bring Sarah to Phoenix for a temporary assignment helping with their wounded. "Why me specifically?" Sarah asked, gathering her field medical pack. "Morrison used to be stationed here," Dr. Peterson explained. "He saw your work on that IED casualty back in August. Said he wanted someone he could trust with his people." The compliment filled Sarah with professional pride. Building trust with combat units was essential for effective medical care. Soldiers needed to know that their medic was competent and reliable under pressure. Convoy Alpha 7 consisted of 4 armored vehicles carrying medical supplies, ammunition, and replacement personnel. Sarah rode in the second vehicle with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran convoy leader who had completed dozens of these supply runs without incident. "First convoy run?" Rodriguez asked as they performed final equipment checks. "Yes, Staff Sergeant," Sarah replied, adjusting her body armor and checking her medical pack one more time. "Route's been quiet lately," he assured her. "Should be a straightforward run. 3 hours each way, quick unload, and back here for dinner." The convoy departed forward operating base Courage at 0800 hours, following a well-established supply route through friendly territory. Sarah watched the Afghan landscape roll past through the vehicle's small windows, noting the scattered villages and cultivated fields that looked deceptively peaceful. The radio chatter was routine, with vehicles reporting their status and position at regular intervals. Sarah reviewed her mental checklist of trauma procedures, though she expected the mission to be uneventful. Combat Outpost Phoenix was only experiencing routine casualties, nothing requiring emergency intervention during transport. "Vehicle 2, this is lead," Rodriguez's radio crackled. "We're approaching Checkpoint Charlie. Everything looks normal." Checkpoint Charlie was a small outpost manned by Afghan National Army soldiers, a routine stop to verify identification and route clearance. Sarah had read about these checkpoints in her pre-deployment briefings but had never actually passed through one. As they approached the checkpoint, Sarah noticed something that seemed odd. The Afghan soldiers manning the position appeared nervous, gesturing frantically at something beyond the convoy's view. Rodriguez immediately became more alert, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. "Lead, this is 2, Rodriguez radioed. "Something's got the ANA soldiers spooked. Recommend we slow down and assess." "Copy that, 2. All vehicles, reduce speed and maintain interval." The convoy slowed as they approached the checkpoint, giving the lead vehicle time to communicate with the Afghan soldiers. Sarah could see several uniformed men gesturing toward a rise in the terrain about 500 meters to the north. "Vehicle 2, be advised," the radio crackled. "ANA reports possible IED discovered on alternate route. They're recommending we proceed through the checkpoint but maintain heightened alert status." Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly, but the situation seemed manageable. IED discoveries were common, and the Afghan army was experienced at identifying and avoiding these threats. The convoy would simply continue on the primary route while explosive ordnance disposal teams dealt with the suspected device. They passed through Checkpoint Charlie without incident, waving to the Afghan soldiers who seemed relieved to see American forces in the area. The convoy resumed normal speed and spacing, following the road toward Combat Outpost Phoenix. "See?" Rodriguez said, relaxing slightly. "Routine stuff. The ANA guys are jumpy because they found something suspicious, but it's nowhere near our route." Sarah nodded, focusing her attention back on the landscape. The mountains in the distance were beautiful, stark and imposing against the clear sky. For a moment, she could almost forget they were traveling through a war zone. The ambush came without warning, as ambushes always do. The first explosion lifted the lead vehicle entirely off the road, flipping it onto its side in a cloud of smoke and debris. Sarah felt the shock wave through her own vehicle as Rodriguez immediately began evasive maneuvers, trying to get out of the kill zone. IED. IED. Lead vehicle is down. Rodriguez shouted into his radio while fighting to control their vehicle. All vehicles, get out of the kill zone. Move. 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 Sarah's medical training kicked in immediately, even as her world exploded into chaos. The lead vehicle was smoking and motionless, with at least 4 soldiers inside who would need immediate medical attention. She began mentally organizing her triage priorities and treatment procedures. Then, the small arms fire started. Bullets began striking their vehicle with metallic pings and cracks, spiderwebbing the armored windows and filling the air with the distinctive sound of combat. Sarah realized with growing horror that this wasn't just an IED attack, it was a complex ambush with multiple shooters positioned to attack the entire convoy. Contact left. Contact left. Rodriguez screamed into his radio while returning fire through his window. We've got multiple shooters in the tree line. Vehicle 1 is immobilized. I say again, Vehicle 1 is immobilized with casualties. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from at least a dozen positions in the terrain surrounding their location. The ambush had been carefully planned, with the IED positioned to disable the lead vehicle and force the convoy into a killing field where insurgents could attack with small arms and rocket-propelled grenades. Vehicle 4, this is 2, Rodriguez continued his radio communications while bullets continued to strike their position. Can you reach Vehicle 1 to check for survivors? Negative, 2. Too much fire between us and lead. We're taking heavy contact from multiple positions. Sarah stared at the overturned lead vehicle, knowing that soldiers inside were wounded and probably dying while the convoy was pinned down by enemy fire. Everything in her medical training screamed at her to get out and reach those casualties, but the amount of gunfire made movement impossible. Doc, stay down. Rodriguez shouted, seeing Sarah reaching for her medical pack. You can't help anyone if you're dead. But Sarah could see movement inside the overturned vehicle. Someone was alive in there, probably badly injured, definitely needing immediate medical attention. The vehicle was burning, and anyone trapped inside would die without immediate evacuation and treatment. I have to get to them. Sarah shouted back, her medical instincts overriding her survival instincts. Not yet. We have to suppress the fire first. Give the gunners time to work. The convoy's other vehicles were returning fire aggressively, trying to neutralize the ambush positions and create enough of a lull for rescue operations. Sarah could hear the distinctive sound of American machine guns working to suppress enemy positions. Minutes passed like hours as the firefight continued. Sarah watched the lead vehicle with growing desperation, knowing that each minute of delay meant less chance of survival for anyone trapped inside. Medical training had taught her that the first hour after trauma was critical, the golden hour when proper treatment could save lives that would otherwise be lost. Vehicle 2, this is 3, a new voice crackled over the radio. I think the fire's starting to die down. I'm going to try to reach Vehicle 1 with my medic. Sarah's heart leaped. Another medic was going to attempt the rescue. But then, she realized something that filled her with dread. Vehicle 3's medic was Specialist Martinez, one of her closest friends from medical training. If anyone was going to risk their life reaching the casualties, Sarah wanted it to be her, not her friend. Negative, Vehicle 3, Rodriguez responded. Too dangerous. We need to wait for air support. But Sarah could see that waiting might mean losing everyone in the lead vehicle. The smoke was getting thicker, and the movement she had observed earlier was becoming less frequent. whoever was alive in that vehicle needed help immediately. The enemy fire had indeed decreased, but it hadn't stopped completely. Occasional shots still rang out from the tree line, and Sarah could see insurgents moving between positions. Any rescue attempt would be extremely dangerous, but the alternative was watching fellow soldiers die. "I'm going," Sarah announced, checking her medical equipment one final time. "Doc, that's suicide," Rodriguez replied firmly. "Wait for air support. Wait for the fire to stop completely." "There's no time," Sarah said, her hand on the vehicle door. "They're going to die if someone doesn't reach them now." Rodriguez grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not hostile. "Listen to me, document. You're no good to those casualties if you get shot trying to reach them. Dead medics don't save lives." Sarah knew he was right from a tactical standpoint, but her medical oath and training were demanding action. She had sworn to preserve life, to help the wounded regardless of danger to herself. Watching soldiers die while she remained safe went against everything she believed about being a medic. The radio crackled with an update. "All vehicles, this is Phoenix Base. We have air support inbound, ETA 10 minutes. Maintain positions until Apaches can clear the area." 10 minutes might as well be 10 hours for critically wounded soldiers. Sarah had seen enough trauma cases to know that 10 minutes could mean the difference between life and death, between a soldier going home to his family or going home in a flag-draped coffin. But, as she prepared to move, something happened that changed everything. A figure emerged from the overturned lead vehicle, crawling through the smoke and debris. Sarah could see it was Corporal Jackson, the vehicle commander, dragging someone behind him. Jackson was wounded but mobile, trying to evacuate his driver from the burning vehicle. And then, Sarah saw the insurgents moving to flank Jackson's position. 3 men in civilian clothes were working their way through the rocks and scrub brush, clearly intending to capture or kill the American soldiers who had survived the initial explosion. They moved with military precision, and Sarah could see weapons in their hands. "Rodriguez!" Sarah shouted, pointing toward the flanking movement. "Jackson's about to be overrun." Rodriguez followed her gaze and immediately saw the threat. "Contact right. Contact right. Enemy moving to flank vehicle 1 survivors." The convoy's gunners shifted fire toward the new threat, but the insurgents were using terrain to stay hidden. Jackson was completely exposed in the open ground between the vehicles, with no cover and no way to defend himself while dragging his wounded driver. Sarah watched in horror as one of the insurgents raised his rifle, clearly preparing to shoot the defenseless Americans. Jackson was focused on evacuating his driver and had no idea he was about to be killed. Everything slowed down in that moment. Sarah could see the insurgent's finger tightening on his trigger. She could see Jackson struggling with his unconscious driver. She could see the inevitable outcome unless someone acted immediately. Rodriguez was engaged with targets to their left and hadn't seen the immediate threat to Jackson. The other convoy vehicles were too far away and focused on different sections of the ambush. In seconds, Jackson and his driver would be dead unless someone intervened. Sarah's hand found her M16 rifle, the weapon she had qualified with but never expected to use in combat. Her medical training had always emphasized her non-combatant status, her role as a healer rather than a killer. But now she faced an impossible choice: maintain her medical oath and watch 2 soldiers die, or violate everything she believed about being a medic and take a life to save lives. The insurgent's rifle was almost centered on Jackson when Sarah made her decision. She raised her M16 and fired. The single shot struck the insurgent's center mass, dropping him immediately. Sarah had never killed anyone before, had never even aimed a weapon at another human being with intent to harm. But her shot was accurate and effective, eliminating the immediate threat to Jackson and his driver. The other 2 insurgents immediately began firing in Sarah's direction, forcing her to take cover while continuing to engage them. Rodriguez realized what was happening and began supporting Sarah's position with suppressing fire. "Good shot, Doc," Rodriguez shouted over the gunfire. "Now keep your head down and let me handle the rest." But Sarah's mind was reeling from what she had just done. She had killed a man. She, who had sworn to save lives, had deliberately ended a life. The moral weight of that action crashed down on her even as the firefight continued around her. Jackson used the covering fire to drag his wounded driver toward the safety of Vehicle 2, moving slowly but steadily across the open ground. Sarah could see blood on both men, evidence of serious injuries that would require immediate medical attention once they reached safety. The Apache helicopters arrived with devastating effect, their chain guns silencing the remaining ambush positions and forcing any surviving insurgents to retreat. The sudden quiet after intense combat was always jarring, leaving Sarah's ears ringing and her hands shaking from adrenaline. "Vehicle 2, this is lead," Jackson's voice came over the radio as he reached their position. "I've got one urgent casualty and need immediate medical attention." Sarah immediately shifted back into medic mode, her medical training overriding her emotional turmoil about the shooting. Jackson's driver, Private Murphy, had suffered severe burns and smoke inhalation during the vehicle fire. His airway was compromised, and he needed immediate intervention to survive. Working quickly and efficiently, Sarah established an airway and began treating Murphy's burns while Jackson received treatment for his own minor injuries. Her hands moved automatically through familiar procedures, but her mind kept returning to the moment she had pulled the trigger. "Doc," Jackson said as she worked on Murphy's injuries, "I saw what you did back there. That guy had me dead to rights. You saved my life and Murphy's life." Sarah nodded but couldn't speak. She had saved lives by taking a life, creating a moral paradox that her medical training had never prepared her for. The Geneva Convention protected medics specifically because they were non-combatants, healers rather than killers. But what happened when being a healer required becoming a killer? The helicopter evacuation arrived within an hour, taking Murphy and the other casualties to the trauma center at Bagram Air Base. Sarah's medical care had been flawless under pressure, and Murphy would survive his injuries because of her quick intervention. But, as the convoy limped back to forward operating base Courage, Sarah struggled with questions that had no easy answers. She had violated her understanding of medical ethics to save lives. She had killed a man to protect her patients. She had crossed a line that she never thought she would cross. The other soldiers in the convoy praised her actions, calling her a hero who had saved American lives under fire. But Sarah didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who had compromised everything she believed about being a medic. The incident report would show that combat medic Sarah Chen had performed her medical duties effectively under enemy fire while also engaging and neutralizing enemy combatants threatening American casualties. The Army would consider her actions exemplary, worthy of commendation. But Sarah knew that something fundamental had changed in that ambush. She was no longer just a healer. She had become something else, something more complex and morally ambiguous than her medical training had prepared her for. The road back to base was long and quiet, giving Sarah time to think about what had happened and what it meant for her future as a medic. She had saved lives, but at the cost of her belief in her own non-combatant status. She had proven that sometimes, in the brutal reality of combat, healers had to fight to save lives. As forward operating base Courage appeared in the distance, Sarah realized that her deployment had fundamentally changed. She was no longer the idealistic young medic who believed that healing and harming were mutually exclusive. She had learned that in war, the line between saving lives and taking lives could become impossibly blurred. The ambush was over, but Sarah's real struggle was just beginning. She had to reconcile her actions with her beliefs, her training with her instincts, her medical oath with her moral responsibility to protect her patients. The questions that emerged from that day would follow her for the rest of her military career and beyond. But, for now, she was alive, her patients were alive, and the mission had been completed. Whatever else had happened in that ambush, Whatever line she had crossed or principle she had compromised, soldiers were going home to their families because of her actions. Sarah Chen was learning that being a medic in combat was far more complex than any training had prepared her for. The ambush had taught her that sometimes, medics do fight, not because they want to, but because they have to. The debriefing session took place 3 days after the ambush, in a sterile conference room that felt disconnected from the violence Sarah had witnessed. Major Harrison, the battalion intelligence officer, sat across from her with a digital recorder and a stack of paperwork, his expression professional but not unkind. "Combat Medic Chen," he began, reviewing his notes, "I need to walk through the events of October 15th with you. This is standard procedure after any combat incident involving medical personnel." Sarah sat rigidly in her chair, still processing what had happened during the convoy mission. Sleep had been difficult since the ambush, filled with dreams that replayed the moment she pulled the trigger. She had killed a man, and no amount of rationalization could change that fundamental fact. According to the preliminary reports, Major Harrison continued, "You engaged enemy combatants while providing medical care during an ambush. Can you walk me through your decision-making process?" Sarah took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts carefully. The official inquiry wasn't accusatory, but she knew her actions had raised questions about the role of medical personnel in combat operations. "I was observing the lead vehicle after the IED explosion," she began, her voice steady despite her internal turmoil. "Corporal Jackson was attempting to evacuate Private Murphy when I observed 3 enemy combatants flanking their position. Jackson was focused on the evacuation and unaware of the threat." "And, at that point, you decided to engage?" "I observed the lead insurgent preparing to fire on Corporal Jackson and Private Murphy. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was engaged with targets to our left and couldn't provide covering fire. The other convoy vehicles were too distant to effectively engage the flanking force." Major Harrison made notes as she spoke, occasionally asking for clarification on timing or positioning. Sarah found herself speaking in the clinical, detached language of military reports, as if describing someone else's actions rather than her own. "Were you in immediate danger yourself when you engaged?" the major asked. Sarah paused, considering the question carefully. "Not at that specific moment, sir." The insurgent was focused on Corporal Jackson. "But, if he had succeeded in killing Jackson and Murphy, our position would have become significantly more vulnerable." "So your primary motivation was protecting fellow soldiers rather than self-defense?" "Yes, sir. My primary concern was preventing casualties among personnel under my medical care." The major nodded, making additional notes. Sarah could see that her answers were being recorded both digitally and in writing, creating an official record of the incident that would become part of her military file. "The enemy combatant you engaged was killed," Major Harrison stated. "Do you have any concerns about the use of lethal force in this situation?" The question struck at the heart of Sarah's internal struggle. Did she have concerns? She had nightmares about the man she had killed. She questioned whether there had been alternatives she hadn't considered. She wondered if her medical oath had been compromised by her actions. "I used the minimum force necessary to eliminate the immediate threat to American casualties," she replied carefully. "I fired one shot, center mass, which proved effective in stopping the threat." "That's not what I asked, Chen," the major said gently. "I asked if you have concerns about using lethal force." Sarah met his gaze directly, knowing that honesty was important both for the official record and for her own peace of mind. "Yes, sir, I do have concerns. As a medic, I'm trained to preserve life, not take it. Using lethal force conflicts with my understanding of medical ethics and my role as a non-combatant." "But, you'd do it again in similar circumstances?" The question forced Sarah to confront the fundamental contradiction in her situation. Despite her ethical concerns, despite her nightmares and guilt, she knew the answer immediately. "Yes, sir. If it was necessary to protect American lives, I would engage enemy combatants again." Major Harrison closed his notebook and turned off the recorder. "Off the record, Chen, you did the right thing. Jackson and Murphy are alive because of your actions. The Army recognizes that medical personnel sometimes face impossible choices in combat." "But what about the Geneva Convention?" Sarah asked. "What about medical neutrality?" "The Geneva Convention protects medical personnel who are clearly marked and engaged in medical duties," the major explained. "But it doesn't require them to stand by and watch fellow soldiers be murdered. Your actions were consistent with military law and ethics." The reassurance was professionally helpful but didn't resolve Sarah's internal conflict. She understood the military perspective, but her personal struggle with the moral implications of her actions continued to trouble her. After the debriefing, Sarah returned to her regular duties at the medical facility, but something fundamental had changed in her relationship with other soldiers. Word of the ambush had spread throughout the base, and personnel who had previously seen her as just another medic now viewed her differently. "Heard you got some combat action last week," commented Lieutenant Martinez during a routine medical examination. "Not exactly what they teach you in medic school, huh?" Sarah conducted the examination professionally, checking the lieutenant's injured shoulder without engaging in the conversation about combat. But she could sense the change in how soldiers related to her. She was no longer seen as purely medical personnel, she was a medic who had proven herself in combat. Specialist Johnson, an infantry soldier who had been treating for recurring headaches, was more direct in his assessment. "Doc, you saved Jackson and Murphy. Nobody's going to question what you did out there. You're one of us now." The phrase "one of us" stuck in Sarah's mind. She had crossed some invisible line during the ambush, moving from protected medical personnel to combatant in the eyes of other soldiers. The transition was both validating and troubling. Dr. Peterson called her into his office a week after the ambush for an informal conversation about her experiences. As the senior medical officer, he had received the official reports and wanted to discuss the implications for Sarah's continued service. "How are you handling the psychological aspects of what happened?" he asked directly. "I'm functional, sir," Sarah replied. "Sleeping better, no longer experiencing flashbacks. I've been able to maintain my medical duties without impairment." "That's not what I asked. How are you handling the fact that you killed someone?" The blunt question forced Sarah to confront her feelings directly. "It's difficult, sir. I became a medic to save lives, not take them. I'm struggling with the contradiction between my medical training and my actions during the ambush." Dr. Peterson nodded understandingly. "That's a normal reaction. Combat medics face unique psychological challenges because their primary mission is humanitarian, but the combat environment sometimes requires them to use lethal force. How do other medics handle it? Different ways. Some compartmentalize, separating their combat actions from their medical identity. Others integrate the experiences, seeing combat as an extension of their protective mission toward casualties. A few struggle enough that they require counseling or reassignment." Sarah considered these options, trying to determine which path might work for her. The idea of compartmentalizing appealed to her, creating distinct mental categories for healing and harming. But the integration approach might be more honest about the realities of combat medicine. "What do you recommend?" she asked. "Continue your medical duties and see how you feel over time. If you find yourself unable to function effectively as a medic, we'll discuss alternatives. But right now, you're providing excellent medical care while managing the psychological stress appropriately." The conversation helped Sarah understand that her struggle was not unique, that other medics had faced similar moral dilemmas and found ways to continue serving effectively. But it didn't resolve her fundamental questions about the ethics of her actions. 2 weeks after the ambush, Sarah received notification that she was being recommended for the Bronze Star Medal for her actions during the convoy attack. The citation praised her exceptional medical care under enemy fire and decisive combat action that saved American lives. The recognition was professionally gratifying but emotionally complex. Sarah felt proud of saving Jackson and Murphy's lives, but uncomfortable with receiving a combat decoration for killing someone. The medal represented both her success as a medic and her failure to maintain her non-combatant status. "You deserve this," Corporal Jackson told her when he returned to duty after recovering from his injuries. "Murphy and I are alive because you had the courage to do what needed to be done." Jackson's gratitude was genuine and heartfelt, but it also reinforced Sarah's sense of moral confusion. She had saved lives by taking a life, creating a paradox that traditional medical ethics didn't adequately address. The medal ceremony was small and informal, conducted during the weekly base formation. As the commanding officer pinned the Bronze Star to Sarah's uniform, she felt the weight of both honor and responsibility that came with the recognition. "Combat Medic Chen represents the finest traditions of military medical service," the commanding officer announced to the assembled personnel. "Her actions under fire demonstrate that medical personnel are willing to do whatever is necessary to protect American lives." The applause from other soldiers was enthusiastic and respectful, acknowledging both her medical skills and her combat performance. Sarah stood at attention, proud of the recognition but still grappling with the moral implications of her actions. After the ceremony, she called her parents to share the news of her decoration. The conversation was difficult because she couldn't explain the specific circumstances that led to the award without violating operational security. "We're so proud of you," her mother said, her voice filled with emotion. "Your grandmother would be so happy to know that you're saving lives over there." Sarah accepted the praise but felt the irony of the situation. She was being celebrated for saving lives, but the method she had used involved taking a life. Her grandmother's simple philosophy about healing didn't account for the moral complexity of combat medicine. The medal brought increased attention from other medical personnel throughout the base. Senior medics who had previously treated her as a junior colleague now sought her opinions and included her in complex medical discussions. Her combat experience had earned her credibility beyond her technical skills. "Chen's been blooded," she overheard one of the veteran medics comment to another. "She understands what it really means to be a medic in a combat zone." The phrase "been blooded" struck Sarah as particularly significant. It implied that her combat experience had fundamentally changed her, marking her transition from theoretical medic to combat-tested medical professional. But the increased respect came with increased expectations. When challenging medical situations arose, other personnel looked to Sarah for leadership and decision-making. Her combat experience was seen as evidence of her ability to handle pressure and make difficult choices. The psychological burden of these expectations sometimes felt overwhelming. Sarah had killed one person in one specific situation, but others seemed to assume that this made her an expert in combat decision-making. She found herself being consulted on tactical medical issues that were outside her training and experience. A month after the ambush, Sarah was assigned to another convoy mission, this time to combat Outpost Alpha for a routine medical supply delivery. The mission was considered routine, but Sarah's presence was specifically requested because of her proven ability to provide medical care under combat conditions. "You're our insurance policy," explained Captain Williams, the convoy commander. "If something goes wrong, we know you can handle both the medical and tactical aspects of the situation." The confidence was flattering but added pressure to Sarah's already complex feelings about her role. She was no longer just a medic who happened to be on convoy missions, she was a medic specifically chosen for her combat experience. The convoy departed without incident, following well-established routes through relatively secure territory. Sarah found herself more alert and aware than she had been during her first convoy mission, constantly scanning the terrain for potential threats and ambush positions. The heightened awareness was partly training and partly paranoia, a natural response to her previous combat experience. But it also represented a fundamental change in how she approached her medical duties. She was no longer just prepared to treat casualties, she was prepared to create them if necessary. The mission proceeded without enemy contact, and Sarah began to relax as they approached their destination. But the psychological preparation for potential combat had required her to maintain a mindset that was distinctly non-medical. She had spent the entire mission ready to kill, even while carrying medical supplies to save lives. At Combat Outpost Alpha, Sarah delivered the medical supplies and conducted health assessments for personnel who had been without regular medical care for several weeks. The work was routine but satisfying, reminiscent of her original conception of military medical service. "Doc, can you take a look at this?" asked Sergeant Thompson, showing her a persistent rash that had developed during extended field operations. "Been bothering me for weeks, but we haven't had a medic available." Sarah examined the condition and prescribed appropriate treatment, feeling the satisfaction that came from solving straightforward medical problems. This was the kind of work she had envisioned when she joined the military medical program, helping soldiers maintain their health and readiness. But even during routine medical care, Sarah found herself thinking differently about her patients and their situations. Thompson was a machine gunner whose weapon might be crucial in defending the outpost. Keeping him healthy and ready for duty wasn't just medical care, it was maintaining combat effectiveness. The integration of medical and tactical thinking was becoming natural for Sarah, even when she wasn't consciously trying to make those connections. Her combat experience had changed how she viewed her medical mission, adding layers of complexity that weren't part of traditional medical training. The return convoy was uneventful, but Sarah maintained the same heightened awareness she had developed during the outbound journey. She was constantly prepared for combat while simultaneously ready to provide medical care, embodying the contradiction that had defined her service since the ambush. Back at Forward Operating Base Courage, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since her deployment began. She was no longer the idealistic young medic who believed that healing and harming were mutually exclusive. Combat had taught her that sometimes protecting life required taking life. The lesson was painful but necessary, forcing her to develop a more nuanced understanding of medical ethics in military environments. The simple moral framework she had brought to deployment was inadequate for the complex realities of combat medicine. But Sarah also recognized that her evolution as a medic was still continuing. Each mission, each patient, each tactical situation was teaching her new aspects of what it meant to provide medical care in a combat environment. The ambush had been a crucial learning experience, but it wasn't the end of her education. As she prepared for sleep that night, Sarah thought about the Bronze Star Medal in her footlocker and what it represented. The decoration acknowledged her willingness to do whatever was necessary to save lives, even if that meant taking lives. It was both an honor and a burden, recognition of her effectiveness and a reminder of the moral complexity of her service. Sarah Chen was no longer the medic who believed that medics don't fight. She had learned that in combat, medics fight when they must, not because they want to, but because the mission of saving lives sometimes requires it. The lesson was hard-earned and would stay with her for the rest of her military career. 3 months after the ambush, Sarah's reputation as a combat-tested medic had spread throughout the regional command. Requests for her assignment to high-risk missions became routine, with unit commanders specifically asking for the medic who saved Jackson and Murphy. The recognition was professionally validating but personally challenging. "Chen, you're being attached to Special Operations Task Force Bravo for their next mission," Dr. Peterson informed her during a cold December morning briefing. "They specifically requested you based on your performance during the convoy ambush." Sarah felt a mix of pride and apprehension. Special operations missions were typically more dangerous than conventional unit operations, with higher casualty rates and more complex tactical situations. Being selected for such assignments was an honor, but it also meant increased likelihood of combat. "What's the mission profile, sir?" she asked, already mentally preparing her equipment loadout. "Classified until you report to their briefing facility. But I can tell you they've lost 2 medics in the past month, one to enemy action, one to a psychological breakdown after multiple casualties." They need someone who can handle both the medical and tactical pressures. The mention of a medic suffering psychological breakdown resonated with Sarah's own struggles. She had managed to maintain her effectiveness despite the moral complexity of her situation, but she understood how combat stress could overwhelm medical personnel. Task Force Bravo operated from a secure compound 20 kilometers from forward operating Base Courage, conducting precision raids and reconnaissance missions against high-value targets. The personnel were experienced special operations soldiers who had worked together for multiple deployments. Captain McKenna, the task force commander, briefed Sarah on her assignment in a windowless room filled with maps and tactical displays. The atmosphere was professional but intense, reflecting the dangerous nature of their operations. Medic Chen, he began without preamble, my team conducts direct action missions against enemy leadership and weapons caches. We operate in small teams, often without immediate evacuation support. When someone gets hit, you'll be their only chance of survival until we can reach a safe landing zone. Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of the assignment. Special operations medics worked under extreme conditions with minimal support, making split-second decisions that often determined whether wounded soldiers lived or died. I've read your file, Captain McKenna continued. You've proven you can provide medical care under fire and make tactical decisions when necessary. That's exactly what we need. The briefing covered operational procedures, medical protocols, and tactical considerations specific to special operations missions. Sarah learned about advanced medical techniques designed for small team operations and unconventional medical equipment suited for covert missions. One more thing, Captain McKenna added as the briefing concluded. My team members are experienced professionals who trust each other completely. They need to trust you the same way. Prove yourself on the first mission, and they'll accept you. Fail, and you'll be returned to your regular unit. The challenge was clear. Sarah had to demonstrate both medical competence and tactical reliability under the most demanding conditions. Her previous combat experience had earned her this opportunity, but it wouldn't guarantee success with special operations forces. Sarah spent the next week training with Task Force Bravo, learning their tactical procedures and communication protocols. The team members were polite but reserved, evaluating her performance with professional detachment. Sergeant First Class Torres, the team's senior enlisted soldier, served as her primary mentor during the training period. A veteran of multiple combat deployments, he understood the unique challenges faced by medical personnel in special operations environments. Doc, we move fast and quiet, he explained during a night navigation exercise. When the shooting starts, we might not be able to provide security while you work on casualties. You'll need to treat wounded while engaging targets yourself. The requirement to provide medical care while conducting combat operations was more demanding than anything Sarah had experienced during conventional unit missions. Special operations medics were expected to be equally competent with medical equipment and weapons. How do other medics handle the dual responsibility? Sarah asked during a break in training. Different ways, Torres replied. The good ones learn to compartmentalize, medic mode when someone's bleeding, soldier mode when someone's shooting at us. The ones who can't make that transition don't last long in special operations. Sarah practiced the transition repeatedly during training exercises, switching rapidly between medical and combat roles as tactical situations changed. The mental flexibility required was exhausting but necessary for effectiveness in special operations missions. The first mission came 2 weeks later, a night raid on a suspected weapons cache in a remote mountain village. Intelligence indicated minimal enemy presence, making it an ideal introduction to special operations for Sarah. Simple in and out, Captain McKenna briefed the team. 6-man team, helicopter insertion, secure the cache, collect intelligence, extract before dawn. Low probability of enemy contact. Sarah checked her equipment carefully, balancing medical supplies with ammunition and tactical gear. The weight limitations of helicopter operations forced difficult choices about what medical equipment to carry, requiring prioritization based on most likely casualty types. The helicopter insertion was flawless, landing the team in a concealed position 2 kilometers from the target village. Sarah's first taste of special operations movement was demanding but exhilarating, 6 soldiers moving silently through mountainous terrain with perfect coordination. The village appeared deserted as they approached the target building, a mud brick compound that intelligence identified as containing weapons and explosives. Sarah established a security position while team members entered the building to conduct their search. Jackpot, Torres radioed after 15 minutes. Multiple weapons, ammunition, and what looks like IED making materials. Need about 30 more minutes to catalog everything. Sarah maintained her overwatch position, scanning the surrounding area for potential threats while team members photographed and documented the weapons cache. The mission was proceeding exactly as planned. Then, everything went wrong. Contact front. Torres shouted over the radio as automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions around the village. We're taking fire from at least 3 buildings. Doc, can you get to our position? Sarah immediately began moving toward the target building, but enemy fire forced her to take cover behind a stone wall. She could see muzzle flashes from windows and rooftops throughout the village, indicating a well-planned ambush. Negative, too much fire between us, she radioed back. I'm pinned down about 50 meters from your position. The team was trapped inside the building while Sarah was isolated in the open, with enemy fighters controlling the terrain between them. The tactical situation was rapidly deteriorating, and Sarah realized she might need to fight her way to her teammates. Doc, we've got one urgent casualty in here. Torres's voice was strained. Thompson took a round through the shoulder, lots of bleeding. Sarah's medical instincts demanded immediate action, but the tactical situation made movement suicidal. Enemy fire was concentrated between her position and the building, creating an impassable killing field. Can you get him stabilized temporarily? She asked, hoping the team had enough medical supplies to handle the emergency. Negative, bleeding too heavy. We need you in here now. Sarah faced the same impossible choice she had encountered during the convoy ambush: maintain her safety and watch a soldier die, or risk everything to provide medical care. But, this time, the tactical situation was more complex and dangerous. The enemy fire was too accurate and sustained to allow a direct assault on her position. Sarah needed to eliminate or suppress multiple fighting positions before she could reach her wounded teammate. Drawing on her special operations training, Sarah began systematically engaging enemy positions with precision fire. Her aim was accurate, and she successfully suppressed 2 fighting positions, creating a brief opportunity for movement. I'm moving to you, she radioed, sprinting across the open ground while enemy bullets snapped past her position. Her heart pounded as she covered the distance to the building, expecting to be hit at any moment. Sarah reached the building and immediately shifted into medical mode, assessing Thompson's wound while other team members provided security. The shoulder injury was severe but manageable with proper treatment. Entry and exit wound, clean through the muscle, she diagnosed quickly. Artery intact, but we need to control the bleeding and prevent shock. Working efficiently despite the continuing gunfire, Sarah established for access and administered pain medication while bandaging the wound. Her medical training took over completely, blocking out the tactical situation to focus on saving Thompson's life. How's he looking, Doc? Captain McKenna asked between bursts of return fire. He'll live if we can get him evacuated within an hour, Sarah replied while checking Thompson's vital signs. Wound stable, but he's losing blood faster than I can replace it. The team called for emergency extraction, but the helicopter couldn't land until enemy fire was suppressed. Sarah found herself in the familiar position of providing medical care while engaging in combat, switching between medic and soldier roles as the situation demanded. Doc, we need suppressing fire from the north window, Torres instructed. Enemy position at 2 o'clock is keeping the bird away. Sarah moved to the indicated position and began engaging the enemy fighters who were preventing helicopter landing. Her shots were accurate and effective, forcing the enemy to take cover and allowing the extraction aircraft to approach. The helicopter landing under fire was chaotic but successful. Sarah helped load Thompson while continuing to provide covering fire, demonstrating the dual capability that special operations demanded from medical personnel. During the flight back to base, Sarah provided continuous medical care to Thompson while reflecting on the mission's lessons. She had successfully integrated medical and combat roles under extreme pressure, proving her ability to function effectively in special operations environments. "Outstanding work tonight, Doc," Captain McKenna told her after the medical evacuation. "Thompson's alive because you got to him under fire, and we all made it out because you could fight as well as heal." The praise was gratifying, but Sarah was more focused on Thompson's condition and prognosis. He would recover fully from his injuries and return to duty within months, a successful outcome that validated her decision to risk her life reaching him. Back at the task force compound, Sarah participated in the mission debrief with the rest of the team. Her performance was evaluated positively, with specific praise for her ability to transition between medical and combat roles as tactical situations changed. "You're one of us now," Torres told her after the debrief. "The team accepts you completely. You've proven you can handle both sides of special operations medicine." The acceptance meant more to Sarah than she had expected. Being trusted by elite soldiers was validation of her competence and reliability under extreme conditions. But it also represented another step in her evolution from pure medic to combat medical professional. Over the following months, Sarah participated in a dozen special operations missions, each one teaching her new aspects of combat medicine and tactical decision-making. She saved multiple lives under fire and eliminated numerous enemy threats while protecting wounded teammates. The psychological integration of healing and harming became natural for Sarah during this period. She no longer struggled with the moral contradictions of combat medicine. They had become part of her professional identity. "Chen's become one of our best assets," Captain McKenna noted in her performance evaluation. "She's equally effective with a scalpel and a rifle, equally comfortable treating casualties and creating them when necessary." The evaluation captured Sarah's transformation perfectly. She had evolved from a medic who happened to carry a weapon into a warrior healer who seamlessly integrated both roles. The change was complete and irreversible. But success in special operations came with psychological costs that weren't immediately apparent. Sarah had killed 7 enemy fighters during her months with Task Force Bravo, each death adding to her emotional burden despite the tactical necessity of her actions. The cumulative stress of combat, combined with the constant pressure of making life-and-death medical decisions, began affecting Sarah's sleep and emotional stability. She remained professionally effective but privately struggled with the psychological weight of her experiences. Dr. Peterson noticed the changes during a routine medical examination. "You're showing signs of combat stress, Chen. Fatigue, hypervigilance, emotional detachment. How are you handling the psychological aspects of special operations work?" Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. "I'm functional, sir. My medical performance remains effective, and my tactical skills continue to improve. I can handle the mission requirements." "That's not what I asked. How are you personally handling the stress of killing people while trying to save people?" The direct question forced Sarah to confront feelings she had been avoiding. "It's difficult, sir. Sometimes I wonder if I've lost sight of my original mission as a healer. But then, someone like Thompson comes along, and I remember why the combat capability is necessary." Dr. Peterson nodded understandingly. "Combat medics face unique psychological challenges. You're trying to preserve life while participating in activities designed to end life. The contradiction creates stress that can be difficult to manage." The conversation led to Sarah being temporarily reassigned to base medical duties for psychological evaluation and recovery. She resented the reassignment initially, viewing it as punishment for her honesty about struggling with combat stress. But the break from special operations allowed Sarah to gain perspective on her experiences and their psychological impact. She realized that her evolution from pure healer to warrior healer had been necessary for effectiveness but costly for her emotional well-being. During her recovery period, Sarah counseled other medics who were struggling with similar psychological challenges. Her experience and insights proved valuable for medical personnel who were facing the moral complexities of combat medicine for the first time. The key is understanding that healing and harming aren't contradictory in combat medicine, she explained to a young medic who had recently experienced his first firefight. They're complementary skills that serve the same ultimate purpose, protecting American lives. Sarah's ability to help other medics process their combat experiences provided personal satisfaction and professional validation. Her struggles with the moral aspects of combat medicine had given her insights that proved valuable for other medical personnel. After 6 weeks of base duty and psychological counseling, Sarah was cleared for return to special operations assignments. But her perspective on combat medicine had evolved once again, incorporating a more nuanced understanding of the psychological costs and benefits of warrior healer identity. Task Force Bravo welcomed her back enthusiastically, having missed her medical skills and tactical competence during her absence. But Sarah approached her return with greater awareness of the psychological challenges and better strategies for managing combat stress. "Good to have you back, Doc," Torres commented during her first mission briefing after returning. "Team hasn't been the same without our warrior medic." The phrase warrior medic perfectly captured Sarah's evolved identity. She was no longer struggling to reconcile healing and harming, she had integrated both capabilities into a coherent professional identity that served the mission of protecting American lives. Sarah Chen had completed her transformation from idealistic young medic to experienced combat medical professional. She had learned that medics don't fight when they must, and she had developed the psychological resilience necessary to handle the moral complexity of that reality. But her journey was far from over, and new challenges would continue to test her evolving understanding of what it meant to be a healer in a combat environment. The final months of Sarah's deployment brought unexpected challenges that tested everything she had learned about combat medicine and moral complexity. As winter gave way to spring in Afghanistan, the security situation deteriorated significantly, with increased enemy activity and more sophisticated attacks against American forces. "Chen, I need to discuss your next assignment, Dr. Peterson announced during a March morning briefing. Division Medical Command wants you to lead a new training program for combat medics. You'll be teaching other medics how to handle the tactical medical situations you've mastered." Sarah felt mixed emotions about the assignment. Teaching would allow her to share hard-earned knowledge with medical personnel who might face similar challenges, but it also meant leaving active operations for a more administrative role. "Will I continue with Task Force Bravo missions?" she asked, having grown attached to the team and their demanding operations. "Limited basis only. Your primary responsibility will be developing and implementing combat medical training that prepares medics for the realities of modern warfare." The assignment reflected Sarah's unique position as one of the few medics who had successfully integrated medical and tactical roles under extreme conditions. Her experiences with conventional and special operations units provided valuable insights for training development. Sarah's first group of students consisted of 12 newly deployed medics from various units throughout the region. Their backgrounds were similar to her own pre-deployment preparation, extensive medical training but limited understanding of combat realities. "Combat medicine is different from everything you learned in training," Sarah explained during her first lecture. "You'll face situations where standard medical protocols don't apply, where tactical considerations override medical preferences, where saving one life might require taking another." The students listened attentively, but Sarah could see skepticism in several faces. Like her former self, they believed that medical training and humanitarian principles would be sufficient for combat environments. "Ma'am, doesn't the Geneva Convention protect medical personnel?" asked Private Rodriguez, a young medic who reminded Sarah of herself 8 months earlier.
Aren't we non-combatants?
Theoretically, yes, Sarah replied carefully.
But enemy fighters don't always respect international law.
You'll face situations where your medical status provides no protection, where you'll need to fight to protect yourself and your patients. Sarah structured the training program around realistic scenarios based on her combat experiences. Students practiced medical procedures while under simulated fire, learned to transition rapidly between healing and fighting roles, and developed the mental flexibility necessary for complex tactical situations. The psychological preparation was equally important. Sarah taught students about the moral complexity they would face, the difficult decisions required when medical and tactical considerations conflicted, and strategies for managing the emotional stress of combat medicine. Some of you will face the choice between maintaining your medical neutrality and saving lives, she explained during a session on medical ethics in combat.
When that moment comes, you'll need to decide what's more important, your philosophical purity or your patient's survival.
The training scenarios grew progressively more challenging, forcing students to make increasingly difficult decisions under pressure. Sarah watched them struggle with the same moral dilemmas she had faced, knowing that theoretical preparation could only go so far. During a particularly intense exercise, Private Martinez broke down emotionally after being forced to choose between treating a wounded soldier and engaging enemy targets threatening other casualties. The scenario was designed to be impossible, with no clearly correct answer. "I can't do this," Martinez sobbed, removing her helmet and sitting heavily on the ground.
"I became a medic to save lives, not to kill people. This isn't what I signed up for."
Sarah knelt beside the young medic, remembering her own struggles with similar moral conflicts. The breakdown was a natural response to the psychological pressure of combat medicine training, and Sarah had learned to expect and address these moments.
"I understand how you feel," Sarah said gently.
"I felt the same way during my first real combat situation.
The contradiction between healing and harming seems impossible to resolve. How do you handle it?" Martinez asked, wiping tears from her face. "How do you reconcile being a healer with being a killer?"
"By understanding that sometimes protecting life requires taking life," Sarah replied. "The enemy fighters who attack medical personnel and wounded soldiers aren't respecting the humanitarian mission you signed up for. When they threaten your patients, fighting becomes an extension of healing." The conversation continued for an hour, with Sarah sharing her own journey from idealistic medic to pragmatic warrior healer. She didn't try to convince Martinez that combat was easy or morally simple, but helped her understand that complexity didn't mean impossibility.
Martinez returned to training the next day with renewed determination, though Sarah could see the internal struggle continuing.
Not every medic would successfully make the transition to combat medicine, and Sarah learned to identify students who might need additional support or alternative assignments. The training program's reputation spread throughout the regional medical command, with units specifically requesting graduates of Sarah's course for high-risk assignments. The success rate spoke to the effectiveness of her realistic, psychologically honest approach to combat medical education. "Shen's producing medics who can actually function in combat," noted Colonel Harris, the regional medical commander, during a program evaluation. "Her graduates are significantly more effective in tactical situations than traditionally trained medics."
But success in training brought Sarah face to face with an unexpected consequence of her combat experience.
Several students began looking up to her as a role model, seeking to emulate not just her medical skills but her combat effectiveness. "I want to be like you, ma'am," Private Johnson confided after a particularly successful training exercise.
"A warrior medic who can handle anything. How many enemy fighters have you killed?"
The question disturbed Sarah more than she expected. Her combat actions had been necessary for mission accomplishment and casualty survival, but she didn't want to glorify violence or encourage students to seek combat for its own sake.
"That's not the right question," Sarah replied carefully. "The right question is how many lives have you saved?"
Combat is a tool that sometimes becomes necessary, but healing is always the primary mission. Sarah began incorporating additional psychological training into her program, emphasizing the emotional and moral costs of combat while teaching necessary tactical skills. She wanted to prepare students for reality without encouraging them to embrace violence unnecessarily. The balance was delicate and personally challenging for Sarah. Teaching combat skills required her to relive and analyze her own violent experiences, forcing continued confrontation with the psychological costs of her actions. Dr. Peterson noticed the strain during one of their regular meetings. The training program is highly successful, but it's taking a toll on you personally. How are you managing the psychological pressure of constantly revisiting your combat experiences? It's difficult, Sarah admitted. Teaching others to kill in service of healing forces me to examine my own actions repeatedly. Sometimes I wonder if I'd become too comfortable with violence. Have you considered that your comfort with violence might be a psychological adaptation rather than a moral failing? Dr. Peterson suggested. Combat effectiveness requires emotional detachment that can be mistaken for moral compromise. The insight helped Sarah understand her own evolution more clearly. Her ability to engage in combat when necessary wasn't evidence of moral degradation but psychological resilience developed through experience and necessity. But the conversation also highlighted Sarah's growing concern about the long-term effects of her combat experiences. She had successfully adapted to the demands of tactical medicine, but at what personal cost? The question became more urgent when Sarah received orders for her final special operations mission before returning to the United States. Task Force Bravo was conducting a high-risk prisoner recovery operation that would require all of her medical and tactical skills. This one's personal, Captain McKenna explained during the mission briefing. Staff Sergeant Williams was captured during a reconnaissance mission 3 days ago. Intelligence indicates he's being held in a mountain compound about 40 kilometers from here. Williams was a special operations soldier Sarah had worked with multiple times during her deployment. He was professional, competent, and well-liked by his teammates. The thought of him in enemy hands motivated the entire team to accept the dangerous rescue mission. Enemy strength is estimated at 15 to 20 fighters, McKenna continued. Compound is heavily fortified, with multiple defensive positions and escape routes. We'll need to move fast and hit hard to extract Williams before they can move him or execute him. Sarah checked her equipment carefully, knowing this mission would likely be her most challenging tactical medical experience. Prisoner rescue operations were inherently dangerous, with high casualty rates and complex tactical requirements. The helicopter insertion was conducted under cover of darkness, landing the 6-man team in mountainous terrain 2 kilometers from the target compound. Sarah's equipment load included advanced medical gear for treating potential torture injuries alongside her standard trauma supplies. The approach to the compound was slow and careful, with team members using night vision equipment to navigate rocky terrain while avoiding enemy sentries. Sarah found herself thinking about Williams and what condition he might be in after 3 days of captivity. Compound in sight, Torres whispered over the radio as they crested a ridge overlooking the target. Lights in 3 buildings, at least 6 guards visible. Williams is probably in the central structure. Sarah established her overwatch position while assault teams prepared to breach the compound. Her role would be providing long-range fire support during the initial assault, then moving forward to treat casualties and examine Williams once the objective was secured. The assault began with coordinated sniper fire, eliminating the exterior guards before they could raise an alarm. Sarah engaged 2 targets from her position, her shots precise and effective in the darkness. Compound breached, McKenna radioed as team members entered the central building. Multiple enemy Kia, searching for Williams now. Sarah watched the compound through her night vision scope, ready to provide additional fire support if enemy reinforcements appeared. The assault was proceeding smoothly, with no indication of American casualties. Williams located, Torres announced. He's alive but injured. Doc, we need you down here immediately. Sarah began moving toward the compound, but enemy reinforcements arrived before she could reach the building. Automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions as additional fighters attempted to recapture the compound.
Contact east. Contact east.
McKenna shouted over increasing gunfire. At least 10 additional fighters moving on our position.
Doc, can you reach us?
Sarah found herself pinned down again, unable to reach wounded teammates while under heavy enemy fire. But, this time, she didn't hesitate to engage enemy positions aggressively, using her tactical training to systematically suppress threats. Her fire was accurate and sustained, eliminating multiple enemy fighters and creating opportunities for team members to maneuver within the compound. Sarah had become a competent combat soldier while maintaining her medical expertise. "I'm moving to you," she radioed after suppressing the nearest enemy position. "Cover my advance from the north window." Sarah sprinted across open ground while teammates provided covering fire, reaching the compound building without being hit. She immediately shifted into medical mode, assessing Williams' condition while other team members secured the perimeter. Williams had been tortured but was conscious and mobile. His injuries were serious but not life-threatening, consisting primarily of dehydration, exhaustion, and multiple lacerations. Sarah began immediate treatment while preparing him for evacuation.
"How bad is it, Doc?" Williams asked weakly as Sarah established for access.
"You'll live," Sarah replied while administering pain medication.
"Couple weeks in the hospital, then you'll be good as new."
The extraction helicopter arrived under fire, landing briefly while team members loaded Williams and withdrew from the compound.
Sarah provided medical care during the flight while reflecting on the successful mission.
Williams recovered fully from his injuries and returned to duty within 6 weeks. The rescue operation was considered a complete success, with no American casualties and minimal enemy survivors.
Sarah's performance was exceptional throughout the mission. "Outstanding work on the Williams rescue," Captain McKenna noted in Sarah's final evaluation.
"Your ability to provide fire support during the assault and immediate medical care during extraction was crucial to mission success."
But the evaluation also marked the end of Sarah's combat deployment. After 11 months in Afghanistan, she was scheduled to return to the United States for reassignment to a stateside medical facility.
The transition from combat to garrison duty would be challenging for someone who had adapted so completely to the demands of tactical medicine. Sarah wondered how she would adjust to routine medical care after experiencing the intensity and complexity of combat medicine. Her final week in Afghanistan was spent completing the transfer of her training program to other medical personnel and conducting farewell visits with units she had supported during her deployment. The recognition and gratitude from soldiers she had treated was overwhelming. "You saved my life, Doc," Corporal Jackson reminded her during a final visit to his unit.
"I'll never forget what you did during that convoy ambush."
Similar conversations occurred throughout the week, with dozens of soldiers expressing gratitude for Sarah's medical care and tactical competence. The appreciation was deeply satisfying but also emotionally overwhelming. Dr. Peterson conducted Sarah's final interview before departure, reviewing her deployment performance and discussing her future military career. The conversation was both professional evaluation and personal reflection on her transformation. "You've evolved significantly during this deployment," he observed.
"You arrived as a skilled medic with strong humanitarian instincts.
You're leaving as a warrior healer with proven tactical competence and psychological resilience."
"Do you think the evolution was positive?"
Sarah asked, still grappling with questions about her moral and professional development.
"Absolutely.
You've learned to balance competing demands and make difficult decisions under extreme pressure. Those skills will serve you well regardless of your future assignments." The flight back to the United States was long and contemplative, giving Sarah time to process her deployment experiences and consider their implications for her future. She had saved dozens of lives while taking more than a dozen enemy lives, creating a complex moral legacy. But Sarah had also developed a nuanced understanding of medical ethics in military environments, learning that humanitarian principles sometimes required tactical implementation. Her deployment had challenged simplistic notions of healing and harming while reinforcing the fundamental importance of preserving life. At Fort Bragg, North Carolina, Sarah was assigned to the Special Operations Medical Training Center, where she would continue developing and implementing combat medical training programs. Her deployment experience made her uniquely qualified for preparing other medics for tactical medical challenges. "We need instructors who understand both the medical and tactical aspects of special operations medicine," explained Colonel Martinez, her new commanding officer. "Your combat experience provides credibility that can't be taught from textbooks." Sarah embraced the assignment enthusiastically, seeing it as an opportunity to share lessons learned during her deployment with medical personnel who would face similar challenges. Her teaching would help other medics avoid some of the moral confusion she had experienced. But adjustment to stateside duty was more difficult than Sarah had anticipated. The routine medical care and administrative responsibilities felt mundane after the intensity and complexity of combat medicine. She missed the camaraderie and shared purpose of deployed units. The psychological transition was equally challenging. Sarah found herself hypervigilant in civilian environments, constantly scanning for potential threats that didn't exist. Her sleep was disturbed by dreams that replayed combat situations and moral dilemmas. "Post-deployment adjustment is normal for combat veterans," explained Dr. Williams, the base psychologist, during a routine evaluation. "You've adapted to high-stress environments, and returning to peaceful settings requires readjustment." Sarah participated in counseling sessions designed to help combat veterans process their experiences and adapt to garrison duty. The sessions were helpful for understanding her psychological responses but didn't eliminate the sense of disconnection from civilian life. Over time, Sarah found purpose and satisfaction in her training responsibilities. She developed advanced courses for special operations medics, incorporating lessons learned from her deployment experiences and ongoing research in tactical medicine. Her students included medics preparing for deployment to combat zones throughout the world. Sarah took pride in preparing them for the moral complexity and tactical challenges they would face, helping them avoid some of the psychological struggles she had experienced. "The key is understanding that combat medicine isn't contradictory to humanitarian principles," she explained to a new group of students. "It's an extension of those principles into environments where traditional medical practice isn't possible." Sarah's reputation as an instructor grew throughout the military medical community. She was invited to speak at medical conferences and contribute to professional journals, sharing insights about tactical medicine and combat medical ethics. The recognition was professionally satisfying, but Sarah remained focused on her primary mission of preparing medics for combat deployment. Each student who graduated from her programs represented lives that might be saved during future operations. 5 years after her deployment, Sarah had trained hundreds of combat medics and contributed significantly to military medical doctrine. Her integration of medical and tactical training had become standard throughout special operations medical education. But Sarah never forgot the lessons learned during her deployment, particularly the moral complexity of using lethal force while committed to preserving life. Her teaching always emphasized the psychological challenges alongside the technical skills. "Being a combat medic means accepting moral complexity," she told students during advanced ethics courses. "You'll face situations where every choice has costs, where saving lives might require taking lives, where humanitarian principles must be implemented through tactical action." Sarah's career continued to evolve, with assignments to increasingly responsible positions in military medical education and doctrine development. But her deployment experiences remained the foundation of her professional identity and personal philosophy. The young medic who had believed that medics don't fight had become a senior medical professional who understood that sometimes medics must fight to fulfill their humanitarian mission. The transformation was complete but never forgotten. Sarah Chen's story represents the evolution of military medicine in modern warfare, where medical personnel must be prepared for moral complexity and tactical challenges that previous generations never faced. Her journey from idealistic healer to pragmatic warrior healer reflects the adaptation required when humanitarian principles meet combat realities. But, throughout her transformation, Sarah never lost sight of her fundamental mission: preserving life and reducing suffering. She had learned that in some environments, that mission required tactical competence alongside medical expertise. The ambush that forced Sarah to make an impossible choice had taught her that medics sometimes do fight, not because they abandon their healing mission, but because they're committed to it. The lesson was hard-earned, morally complex, and professionally essential. Sarah's legacy would be measured not just in lives saved during her deployment, but in the hundreds of medics she trained to handle similar moral complexity with professional competence and personal integrity. Her story became part of military medical tradition, teaching future generations about the evolution of healing in warfare. The red cross she wore on her helmet remained a symbol of humanitarian protection, but Sarah had learned that sometimes, protecting humanitarian principles required tactical action. She had become living proof that medics can fight when they must, while never forgetting that healing remains their highest calling.